In May 2023, the Writers Guild of America went on strike and the Screen Actors Guild followed suit in July, forcing most productions in Hollywood to come to a standstill. When negotiations went south, they took to the picket lines and studios weren't too happy. So what exactly went down? I'm Harry, and this is Trash Talk Reverse. Welcome to Trash Talk Reverse, where I trash talk Hollywood, or I do the reverse. So two big unions in Hollywood, the WGA and SAG-AFTRA, went on strike to protect the rights of writers and actors in Hollywood. The Writers Guild strike ended near the end of September, and the SAG strike ended with the first full week of November. And this was due to the studios finally coming to terms with each guild. But why were they on strike to begin with? Both guilds had their studio contracts end this year, and upon proposing new contracts, the studios refused to meet their requests to protect and compensate the workers properly, even though it would cost them nothing to do the former and the tiniest fraction of their revenues to do the latter. While these contracts involved a lot, there were two main issues surrounding both strikes. The first issue asked studios to not use AI to essentially replace their workers. The studios intended to use AI to write screenplays quickly and would use actual human writers to revise and clean up those scripts, all in an effort to save time and money. In terms of actors, the studios consistently returned proposals to SAG-AFTRA that included scanning background actors, also known as extras, so that their images and likenesses could be used in the future despite the actual actors not working or being paid for that. Studios also wanted to use AI to replicate the likenesses of actors across the board without consent. Why the hell would anyone agree to that? The other issue was residual pay. Basically, when network television airs a TV show or a rerun, the writers and actors are supposed to get some small cut of that, like I'm talking pennies. So now the unions are saying that these rules should also apply for streaming so that writers and actors can get paid for the work they've done as people watch the shows in the future. This is important because they're only paid during the few weeks or months they spend writing and filming, and if they don't have other projects lined up, then residuals should help them be financially stable during those off months. And even with other projects lined up, for most actors the pay is not much to make a living on, which is why the union asked for increased minimums for their lowest paid members. I think a lot of people assume that these strikes are for the famous millionaire actors or the big screenwriters who get paid millions for a movie script, but actually most workers in these unions are barely scraping by. All the background and supporting actors, actors on small projects or most TV shows, writers who work on TV shows only part of the year or even every couple years if the seasons get spaced out like they did during the pandemic, like these requests aren't for the big stars, so the money issue is actually really important. The lowest paid writers do have good weekly pay for these jobs, but they also have much fewer working weeks. And if you're only writing on one show and your seasons have a year in between, you're spending a lot of that few weeks' salary on rent and food for the whole year. And now imagine that the show doesn't get picked up for another season. Now you're living on these savings until you find another show in competition with all the other writers out there. Movie scripts pay better, but this is an even more difficult job to get and comes with less working stability. Like you never know when you're getting hired again or selling another script. And you might even get replaced by the studio after writing them a first draft, or only get hired to do a rewrite for someone else, which pays less. Plus, I don't know if y'all spent any time in LA or New York, but those cities are expensive as hell, and it's extremely difficult to afford living there on a salary other states would consider enough. And of course, those are not the salaries being offered anyway. For most positions, the salaries are so ridiculous, like literally no one can afford rent. For writers and actors, they're not working the typical 40-hour week, 48-week years. Their work is more on and off, so it's even more difficult to afford living in these places. And yet, if they don't live in these cities, it's nearly impossible to find the kind of work they want to be doing, especially for actors. Despite this, the studios were acting like it was causing them gastrointestinal pains to even consider the terms. Multiple CEOs of big studios such as Bob Iger of Disney came out against the strikes. What a surprise! Bob Iger actually called it disturbing and said the demands were unrealistic, which is a wild thing to say when you make over $25 million annually. It would apparently take around $343 million across all the studios to meet the demands for the writers, and Disney's revenue last year was over $82 billion. That's one studio alone. Yeah, there are operating costs, but surely you can spare 0.4% of your revenue? Not even 4%, y'all. It's literally 0.4% of Disney's revenue alone that would cover it for all the studios. The SAG proposal is valued to cost over $1 billion, so for the sake of math, let's say it's $1 billion even, and let's say it's split perfectly evenly between the 8 studios. For Disney alone to cover their portion, that would cost like 0.15% of their revenue. Again, not 15%, 0.15%. Meanwhile, here are the highest paid Hollywood executives in the past 5 years. Ted Sarandos of Netflix with $192 million, Bob Iger with $195 million, Reed Hastings of Netflix with $209 million, Ari Emanuel of WME with $346 million, and David Zaslav of Warner Bros. Discovery with $498 million. The WME one is actually crazy to me because that's not even a studio, that's an agency, and I know all the major agencies overwork and underpay the hell out of their assistants. Then you got Warner Bros. Shelving a fully completed Wile E. Coyote movie for a $30 million tax write-off when their CEO makes this much. There's really no reason for these dudes to be making that much money. Like, bro, what do you even do with that? And there's no way y'all really deserve those sums in proportion to the work you put in. No one's asking them to give up their salaries entirely or anything, but if a smaller film studio like A24 could accept all the demands the unions made right away, then why was it so hard for y'all? Sure, A24 doesn't have as many people to pay as y'all do, but y'all also make a crap ton more money anyway. These studio heads just kept countering with terrible proposals and being all kinds of assholes. Earlier in the summer, just before SAG went on strike, one studio exec said their plan to withstand the writer's strike was to let things go on until the union members started losing their apartments and houses. I mean, what the hell, man? You gotta be some massive type of evil to say that. To want people to become broke and homeless just so you don't have to give up the tiniest percent of your company's revenue? Not even your own money, by the way, like that's the other thing. Do these execs think the money has to come from their own pockets? Even if they did, you can't take $1 million pay cut? Like, why are y'all taking this so personally? Honestly, if the actors hadn't gone on strike, it could have gotten really bad for the writers, because while their strike did have an impact on the industry, the actors' strike actually forced most of the industry to basically shut down. The WGA strike meant that any show employing WGA writers couldn't proceed because those writers were on strike. That included any show who had writers' rooms that were supposed to be meeting during that time, scripted shows plus talk shows which employ WGA writers to write their jokes and bits and stuff like that, also anyone hired to work on a movie script, all of them had to stop. Unscripted content like reality TV was not affected by this since they don't have writers. Animation shows that employed members of TAG, which stands for the Animation Guild, were also able to continue, like the Phineas and Ferb revival. Shows that were already written were also not technically affected since they could begin production, but generally it's not good to go into production on a show without the writers because stuff can get changed in the script during production. Movies that had already been written or sold or worked on by a WGA member could proceed with production, or at least this was the case before July when SAG went on strike. The SAG-AFTRA strike was only for guild members in their TV, theatrical, and streaming division after their contracts ended in early July, so union members could still do commercials and other acting gigs that weren't under TV shows and movies, but they couldn't do any press at all to promote the shows or movies they were in or even share behind-the-scenes stuff, which is why when SAG went on strike, all the casts of the summer movies had to stop their press tours, and why now that the strike is over, everyone can post their behind-the-scenes pictures. They also couldn't do award shows, premieres, conventions, and basically anything to do with their TV or movie careers. It meant that every SAG production had to come to a halt once the strike was announced, shows and movies both. Most productions in Hollywood, even independent ones, are SAG approved, meaning these productions can hire only SAG actors and only under the terms approved by the guild, though if they hire someone who's not a member yet, that person can become a member after being hired by the production and going through some yellow tape. For companies that actually agreed to the guild's terms right away, like A24, their productions were able to get permission to continue. Same with Lionsgate getting permission to let the stars of the Hunger Games prequel promote the movie prior to the strike ending. The major studios that were labeled as struck companies, aka the companies that didn't agree, were Disney, Amazon, Apple, NBC Universal, Paramount, Warner Bros. Discovery, Sony, and Netflix. And if you're wondering, yes, that's every single big studio. But it wasn't just them alone that was the issue. They, along with like 350 other TV and film production companies, are represented by the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. This is who kept providing the ridiculous counteroffers wanting to create digital content and replicas without consent, even up until the last second. Both guilds spent so much time trying to make progress with them and even put up with threats to cancel shows or draw out the deal through the next year. By doing so, studios would also be screwing the crew members that were really struggling during the strike and couldn't work on production since they were mostly shut down. And guess what? The studios actually tried to use this to guilt trip strikers, but y'all are the ones who could have avoided the strike altogether if you just gave the unions their deserved protections. You might be wondering, what about the Directors Guild? Well, they are definitely never going on strike. They did once for like 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, way back in 1987. But generally, the Directors Guild doesn't really butt heads with the studios. DGA members were told prior to the writer's strike that contractually they could not be protected from being fired if they chose to strike in solidarity and refused to cross the picket line. Given that there's some crossover in membership between the WGA and DGA, that created problems for those people who didn't want to cross the WGA picket lines but also didn't want to lose their non-writing jobs. Technically, they would have been allowed to work on those non-writing jobs, but it's really a personal morality kind of thing. If you're a non-union member and you're replacing a union member during the strike and doing the work that they otherwise would have been hired to do, then that's considered scabbing. In September, Drew Barrymore, whose talk show was not on strike under SAG but was on strike under the WGA, she decided to proceed with her show anyway and was going to be involved with writing herself, so she actually would be scabbing because she would have been doing the work that her employees couldn't do while they were on strike. But she changed her mind and decided not to go through with it after people called her out for continuing to film the show and kicking out audience members with WGA support pins. Unfortunately for her, she crossed a line, and once the WGA strike was resolved, her writers refused to return to her show. She wasn't the only one that tried to get away with something like that. Netflix was caught trying to film random unsuspecting pedestrians on the street to make up for what background actors would normally be hired to do if productions hadn't been halted. They basically would have made those random people into scabs even though they had no idea, and scabbing is grounds for getting blackballed from joining those unions, which for actors basically means you would pretty much never be able to get work in the industry. If someone wasn't part of these two unions and was already working for struck companies when the strike happened, they could still keep working since striking in solidarity could lead to them losing their jobs. This includes TAG, as I mentioned before, and VFX workers, which I'll get to in a bit. Similarly, in the UK, their union was not on strike and they were not legally allowed to strike in solidarity, so shows like House of the Dragon that employ British actors could still continue production. Meanwhile, in South Korea, Netflix is literally dodging calls from the president of the Korea Broadcasting Actors Union because their actors don't get paid any residuals from Netflix and their supporting actor rates start at like $300 per episode. Of course, companies like Netflix didn't really care because they already had tons of content available on their platform for subscribers to watch, and so they were willing to push strikers to their limits. Then there's Warner Brothers, who suspended multiple deals they had with TV producers who were WGA members. And even though Warner Discovery said they anticipated making $500 million less in revenue this year than they did last year, they also said they saved $100 million this summer by not accepting the WGA requests. In addition to writers and actors facing these issues, VFX artists have constantly spoken about miserable working conditions and low pay, but they never had a union to fight for their rights. About a decade ago, there was a case with the VFX company Rhythm & Hughes, which was up for 2 Oscars for Snow White and the Huntsman and Life of Pi, and 1 for the latter. But just 11 days prior, they had to file for bankruptcy. I've linked a short YouTube documentary about their case in the description if you want to learn more about that, but in essence what they talk about is how the studio might give them a certain amount of money to get a certain number of shots done, but then extend how much time is needed to work on those shots based on changes that come about during the production process. But the studio wouldn't be paying for that time. That money would have to come from Rhythm & Hughes' pocket unless they were to overwork and underpay people or lay people off or cut salaries, and since they didn't want to do any of that, they ended up having to file for bankruptcy. According to this video, some of these VFX crews would end up working for 100 hours a week towards the end of the post-production workflows. So many of these VFX companies would have to fight for work from just these major studios. Back then it was 6, but with the addition of Netflix, Amazon, and Apple, and the inhalation of 20th Century Fox by Disney, it's now 8. And they would basically hire the VFX companies that were willing to do it for less money. The studios were also incentivized to go to companies abroad, like in Canada, because then the studios would get a tax rebate. There was a protest outside the Oscars the year Life of Pi won, and the VFX crew got their speech cut off, which led to an uproar in the VFX community. But that was a decade ago, and things still haven't really changed. Since the release of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse earlier this year, several of the animators on that film came out about terrible working conditions, which led to like 100 artists leaving the film. They would be asked to redo work that was already finished and approved multiple times, and work up to 11 hours a day for 7 days a week. There's really no reason for it to be this bad apart from the studios being ridiculous. Amy Pascal, a massive executive who headed Sony and did a lot of projects for Marvel, responded to the complaints by saying, "I guess, welcome to making a movie." I mean, what a bitch. Maybe if y'all weren't so bad at communicating and preparing exactly what the directors and producers wanted, then these workers wouldn't have to spend extra hours, weeks, even months redoing and changing stuff they've already done. Like, that's just preposterous to me. I understand obviously things can come up during production and ideas and plans can change, but goddamn, surely there's a more efficient workflow so that your VFX artists and animators aren't doing massive amounts of unpaid work. There was a guy who tweeted that he worked on Mulan, the animation film, and he said it was extremely difficult with super long hours, but they were okay with it because their leaders were respectful and they got paid really well with overtime. You have to compensate your workers. It's really that simple. And the studios can definitely afford it, whether it's their own post-production house or one they've hired for a project. But the truth of the matter is, they don't want to pay them. This industry, like many other industries, revolves around exploiting workers and squeezing out as much output for as little money as possible and maximizing the hell out of your profit margins. The goal is to pump out as many movies as they can as quickly as they can. Quality be damned, because quality doesn't make as much money as quantity does. Sure, it also costs money, but they can just turn that into a tax break. And I'm not even kidding. The MCU's newest release, The Marvels, has a budget of around $270 million, but 55 of that was actually a subsidy from the UK, so they only really had to spend around $215 million. But did they even spend that much? Or is there some fancy accounting involved? John Cusack, the star of Say Anything, tweeted during these strikes that though Say Anything had been quite successful, he learned about 10 years ago that Fox claimed a loss of $44 million on the film. He said, "The film cost about $13 million to make, and money spent to release was minimal at the time. 30 years in, that film lost millions every year. A neat accounting trick, don't you think?" But he's totally right. This is what Seth MacFarlane joked about at the 2013 Oscars when he said that because of the massive success of 2012 movies that ran up to almost $11 billion at the domestic box office, studio accountants never had to work harder to prove nothing made a profit. His joke still holds up today because that's what these companies do. They have producers and executives that siphon money away into their personal bank accounts or keep it for the company rather than admitting they're able to pay their employees a livable wage. Why do y'all think movies these days have such massive budgets? Yes, there's inflation, yes, there's new technology, all this other stuff, but it's also way easier to steal money from a $200 million budget than it would be to do so from a $13 million budget, and properly account for the missing cash. You really think The Marvels needs a higher budget than 3 out of the 5 Pirates of the Caribbean movies? Those movies had to deal with ships on the ocean, which is some of the most difficult stuff to film and VFX, and on top of that, they had to CGI the skeleton crew and Davy Jones' locker crew. The most expensive Harry Potter came in at $250 million, and that was mostly because of actor contract renewals. So with $270 million, what the hell did the Marvels use its budget for? It's not even 2 hours long. I'm not saying that this movie in particular had some sketchy stuff going on behind the scenes, but the same argument can be used to apply to a lot of movies with massive budgets that feel like they don't really need that budget. Plus, Marvel's under Disney, and Disney's always been on the money squeeze game. They even did it with Disney Channel. Joey Bragg, an actor on Disney Channel's Liv and Maddie, said that Disney Channel was actually allowed to pay actors less than minimum wage in the first 3 seasons of some shows, after which, rather than giving them a season 4, they would simply do a soft reboot under a different name, which is why they had Hannah Montana Forever rather than technically calling it season 4, and they had Sweet Life on Deck rather than giving the original show 3 more seasons. And it's not just Disney, though the network I'm about to mention is under Disney now, so looks like y'all fit right in. Actor Angelica Ross tweeted that she was under a 7-year contract with FX for American Horror Story, and because she was a series regular, she wouldn't be able to work anywhere else without FX's approval. So when Marvel came knocking, she couldn't go over there, even though FX had simply put her on hold after AHS 10 with the promise of letting her return for AHS 11. She ended up not having a role in AHS 11 and said she hasn't had an acting job in years, which sucks because this whole situation isn't even her fault. American Horror Story was created by Ryan Murphy, who I've mentioned previously for being the lunatic that created the Dahmer show on Netflix. And he's also the asshole who didn't want to stop production on AHS 12 during the strike. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's look at what Disney's doing now. They completed an entire season of their Spiderwick Chronicles reboot, then decided to not even put it on Disney+, apparently due to cost-cutting reasons. Bro, what? You made the entire season and you won't even put it on the platform? Then what was the point of even making it if not to release it? What was the point of having your own streaming platform if not to host the content that you make? They also removed a movie called The Crater in July that released in May and had no marketing, and long before that, they removed the first and now only season of The Mysterious Benedict Society, also for no reason. They're not the only ones, as I mentioned Warner Brothers before, who are now forced to shop the Coyote vs. Acme movie due to major backlash when they said they weren't going to release it. Paramount also removed a bunch of content from Paramount Plus earlier this year, and it's also why shows are suddenly getting canceled and ended by streamers left and right. Wouldn't you think that the whole point of having these streaming platforms is to create a space where you can host content forever and let people discover and watch and rewatch them on demand whenever they wanted? Oh, but here's an idea. Let's get rid of content from our platforms that we produce so that we don't have to pay residuals. Oh, and here's another idea. Let's scrap our new stuff without advertising it or giving it time to find viewership or just letting that one random person find their new favorite show, so instead we can call it a loss and save on taxes. Notice how it always comes back to taxes? These studios are so stingy when it comes to compensating their workers, but suddenly Disney has $8.6 billion to buy out the remaining 33% of Comcast stake in Hulu? What's the point when you're just going to remove half the content on there anyway? Will I be halfway through the new season of Hell's Kitchen and suddenly I can't finish it anymore because it's gone? Also, Disney fully owning Hulu means that Hulu might no longer be able to host content from other companies. Like just this year, they had stuff from Lionsgate, like the whole Hunger Games saga, some Maze Runner stuff. They even had Twilight for the people who love watching garbage. They had stuff that was under NBC Universal, which is owned by Comcast, like all the Bravo reality TV shows. They had some indie stuff too, which Netflix also has because they're a streaming platform in addition to original content producer. But Disney is a content producer that made a streaming platform to house all their own content. Their new combined platform of Disney Plus and Hulu is set to launch in the spring of 2024, so I'm hoping that, well, first of all, fix your damn user interface. Both platforms have such bad user navigation and ease of use. And second, I'm hoping that they won't make it exclusively Hulu Originals, 20th Century Fox, and Disney-produced content. It can still be mostly that. I mean, yeah, that's the point of the platform, but Hulu was created as an alternative to Netflix, so it would be nice for it to retain the ability to license stuff that the Disney umbrella isn't producing. Funny enough, Disney is actually considering licensing some of their content to Netflix, which is wild because didn't you make your own platform to avoid just this? This is why streaming platforms should have always stayed separate from production. Because when you license the shows you made to other platforms, you get paid for that. But when you host it on your own platform, you're just paying yourself. Sure, they get a ton of money from the subscribers, but instead of using that money to license stuff from other studios, they just remove their own content. So is this like a have your cake and eat it too and also throw it away kind of situation? We need to go back to a system where production and distribution are separate. I don't care what y'all gotta do to achieve that, but if we just had like 3 or 4 platforms total, separate from all the content producers, then everyone gets paid. The platforms make money from subscribers, and the content producers make money from licensing. These massive media conglomerates need to be broken up so that we can have a new era in Hollywood that focuses on equal collaboration rather than acquisition and exploitation. In addition to content being removed, these streamers are also raising prices so that we're the ones paying for them to pay the writers and the actors. Disney and Hulu are raising the prices for their ad-free tiers so that people who pay for that will help them pay their workers, and people who switch to ad-supported will allow ad revenue to pay the workers. Netflix is planning on raising prices after the actors strike, but let's be real. When is Netflix not raising prices? Netflix is the bitch that won't let you share an account with your parents if you don't live together under the same roof, so if you're in college, for example, I guess Netflix would rather you killed yourself than log in from your dorm. And it's not just college students. I still share Netflix with my parents, so do many of my friends. I also share Disney and Hulu and ESPN with them, though I guess not for much longer since they're also going to follow in Netflix's footsteps. So many adults are sharing with their families because it makes having these platforms less expensive. Like my parents pay for Netflix while I pay for the Disney bundle, but what's the damn point of having either platform now if it's going to cost so much and only one of us can use it? Trying to force me to create my own Netflix account when the only reason I'd even use it right now is for a 10th rewatch of The Last Kingdom. It's not like there's much other content on there that's actually good, and even if there is, I wouldn't even know what else is on there unless I browse for hours, because y'all don't want to make an effort to market what's on your own platform. So when no one watches that stuff, and no one knows about it, and no one's able to even accidentally discover it, it gets canceled, usually just after the first season. Apparently, Netflix is thinking about starting a side hustle where they have themed restaurants so you can eat Demogorgon risotto while sitting across from cardboard cutouts of Wednesday Addams and Joe Goldberg. See, I get why they want to do that though, because having a side hustle gives you more money and more freedom. Like Disney has parks and cruises utilizing all their characters. They created a specific family-friendly brand and garnered a massive fan base with extreme dedication, then added Star Wars and Marvel's fan bases on top of that. So now a huge chunk of these people will not only pay to see their movies and stream their shows, but they'll also go to these parks and cruises and buy merch and spend even more money. And people who don't care about Disney might still go to these parks and cruises just because they like amusement parks and cruises. So now you're appealing to another demographic. Same with Universal and their parks, since they have Jurassic Park and Harry Potter, and both these studios have parks all around the globe. Meanwhile, for Amazon and Apple, the Hollywood stuff is the side hustle. Amazon has a massive income from being a global marketplace, and Apple is a massive tech giant, and they've both entered the entertainment content production space basically for fun. Obviously, they can't just make whatever they want, but since their income is diversified like that, it severely lessens the burden of the content they produce, and they also don't have to produce that much in order to maintain subscriptions. Since anyone with Amazon Prime can access Prime Video, their subscription is contingent mainly on people wanting fast, free shipping. And for Apple, their business model for creating customers that use all Apple exclusively Apple allows them to maintain and promote to their massive customer base that already has Apple Music and Apple Podcasts and Apple everything else. So now they can promote Apple TV and gradually grow their subscribers that way. So given that, why were they all crying, screaming, throwing up at the prospect of having to pay their workers? And if they had gotten their way, they would literally be sacrificing the quality of their content in addition to screwing over their writers and actors. The writing would honestly suck even worse than it already does because AI derives its work from what already exists. I messed around with an AI screenwriting tool and a plot generation tool in preparation for this episode, and all they do is build based on existing tropes, formulas, and examples. I used original ideas and got very formulaic outlines as if the screenwriting AI was taught to reference Save the Cat or other specific screenplay formulas or general storylines like Hero's Journey. When I put these ideas into the plot generation tool, they literally fed me back the same information I gave them. For example, I described a mystery that my main character, a private investigator named Carrie, has to solve, and gave them about a paragraph of information on the overall plot. I ended my input like this. While figuring all this out, Carrie has to come to terms with the dysfunction of her own family that left her childhood in shambles and led to a jaded adulthood. Here's what the plot generator gave me in reference to this particular input. It said, as Carrie investigates the case, she uncovers the deep-rooted dysfunction within her own family. Her painful past, marred by a troubled upbringing, left Carrie with unresolved emotional scars and led to a jaded adulthood. Girl, is that not literally what I told you? They took what I gave them, switched around some words, then repeated the phrasing in a different way. I tried the screenwriting scene tool with the following prompt. Jack Sparrow meets Will Turner for the first time. Jack is trying to escape the noose. Will is trying to catch him and turn him over. Genre, fantasy. Now, if you've seen Curse of the Black Pearl, the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, you'll know that this is essentially a non-detailed, watered-down summary of the scene where Jack runs into the blacksmith shop and has a sword fight with Will. But all I put in was this exact prompt and genre that I just said. And what did I get? A scene set in Port Royal noting Jack as a pirate and Will as a blacksmith. The whole scene is different from the original, like Will's chasing Jack down an alley in this version, but the essence and location and facts are still the same. The dialogue, while not very good, it still sounds like it would have come from Jack and Will's characters. Like Will says, I may be a blacksmith, but at least I have a conscience. Which is very in character because, of course, this tool pulls directly from the movie where Will says, at least my conscience will be clear, and gets called a blacksmith a million times. This version of the scene ends with Jack asking Will if he's heard about the Black Pearl, the name of the ship from the actual movie, and offering him the chance to join him, which in the original movie happens in a later scene with the characters flipped and Jack in jail, but that's the extent to which the differentiating can go. As I said before, all I gave them was this bare-bones prompt using their names in a genre, and it automatically gave me a near copy of the existing scene with pulled references from other parts of the movie. It couldn't even give me something original, like maybe Jack's an evil wizard who killed Will's parents when he was a baby and now Will's all grown up and wants to get him back. Oh wait, Though in all fairness, I do wonder what the AI tool would do if I asked them to give me the first confrontation between a generic nameless 11-year-old and a generic nameless dark wizard. Like, would they call the kid Harry? I did do a second version of the same Jack and Will prompt by changing the genre to action. This exchange takes place when Jack is in jail, aka the second movie scene I referenced earlier. Admittedly, it is more different than the original, but it's still within the confines of the original movie's world, and some bits of dialogue like Jack saying, "My dear William," and Will saying, "I cannot let you escape," are directly lifted from the original movie, word for word. Notice, of course, that neither of these generated scenes are anywhere near the quality of the original scenes that they emulate, and yet, they would never even be generated if not for the original scenes. That, in a nutshell, is what AI can do for screenplays. Write what has already been written, with slight variation. The WGA deal when it comes to AI says AI can't write or rewrite literary material, and generated material doesn't count as source material. This ensures it can't be used to undermine a writer's credit or separated rights, which are the specific rights belonging to the writer that are separated from the group of copyrights that the company gets. Studios also can't require writers to use AI and must disclose to writers if any materials given to them have been generated by AI or incorporate AI-generated materials. The agreement also says that the WGA can challenge the studio's use of writers' materials to train AI in the future. Already, we can see this deal isn't perfect, as studios still can provide materials generated with AI as long as they tell the writer and don't use that to reduce the pay that the writer would typically get for writing or rewriting a script based on provided materials. Also, writers can elect to use AI themselves and their previous works can be used to train AI for now. I'm honestly hoping the writers won't be tempted to use AI to generate ideas or write the full screenplays to cut down on time spent, because AI ain't really your friend. The main thing keeping the studios at bay for the time being is that AI-generated content can't be copyrighted, which keeps studios from owning that content and intellectual property. Another provision was regarding the streaming residuals. Studios will now have to provide streaming data to the WGA under an NDA, which, I mean, honestly, if we can get box office info publicly, then why can't we get streaming data publicly? And no lies. Like Netflix coming out and saying that 230 million people watched Red Notice, like, let's be serious now. Because if that's the real number, then that just means Netflix has such crap content that subscribers are forcing themselves to watch something that sucks. Though I do say this as someone who watched Red Notice and got a very different movie than what I expected going in. So maybe the other 230 million minus one viewers had the exact same mindset. Or they stuck it out for Ed Sheeran's cameo, which was surprisingly the only good part of the movie. Writers of streaming content will get paid based on similar data, including bonuses if the episode or film they worked on is viewed on the platform within the first 90 days of release. Which sounds pretty awesome, but remember what I said about these platforms refusing to market the content they have? It might honestly lead to new content getting pushed way down by the algorithm so that the payouts aren't as high. The one provision I'm a little iffy on is writers' room minimums. This provision requires studios to hire a minimum number of writers for the writers' room of each TV show based on how many episodes there are. A minimum of 3 writers, including the showrunner, must be guaranteed 10 weeks of employment in the development rooms. Then once greenlit, companies must employ 3 writers in the writers' room for shows with 6 or fewer episodes, 5 writers for 7 to 12 episode shows, and 6 writers for 13 or more episode shows. And in addition to that, there must also be at least 3 writer-producers in each of these rooms across the board. Also once greenlit, that minimum staff is guaranteed employment for either 20 weeks or however long the post-greenlight room lasts. The development room requirement I understand, because a lot of studios will force a tiny group of writers to break an entire season in just a few weeks, which is immense pressure. And I also get the minimum weeks of employment so that studios don't force writers to push out those episodes in record time. But the writers' room minimums? I don't know, y'all. Right now, a lot of shows in this era of streaming TV are 8 or 10 episodes, and I don't think you need 8 writers to write each of those seasons. People would literally be sitting around doing nothing. There are showrunners out there who prefer to write full seasons or limited series by themselves, which the WGA would allow under this contract. But if they wanted to work with only 2 or 3 other high-level writers max, or write a 13-episode show with only a handful of writers, then that sucks for them. I get that having more than one voice on a show is usually good. It allows people to bounce ideas off each other and come up with strong story and character arcs and take some of that pressure off you. But y'all don't need this many people. According to this article in Variety from August that I'll link in the description, a lot of showrunners privately don't like this provision. They don't want to hire extra people that they don't need, and they don't want to employ people and have them sit around doing nothing. The necessity for a writer's room and the perfect number of writers will differ from show to show based on the creative need of that show. One showrunner said they want to be in charge of running their own show rather than having their union tell them how to do it. The only showrunner to speak on this publicly has been Taylor Sheridan, the creator of Yellowstone and the sole writer of most of its seasons as well as all of its spin-offs. Some writers were against it too, saying they wouldn't want to be hired just to do nothing and have their contributions not heard. You'd be in that writer's room getting people coffee and having no actual teleplay credits for the show. Other writers think showrunners would just hire their friends and have them get paid to do nothing. I get the issue that the guild wanted to solve. They wanted to make sure that there were more jobs available for writers in what is already a difficult environment for getting writing jobs, especially with studios choosing to produce fewer shows overall with fewer seasons, but I don't know that this was the right solution to the problem. I personally don't know what the solution could be. But this feels like it'll just create problems of its own. Like studios might choose to greenlight mostly 6-episode shows so they can save money on that. And for shows that do get more than 6-episode seasons, they might face cut costs elsewhere. The SAG deal isn't perfect either. After a long back and forth with the studios, they did get a lot of great provisions such as increased wage minimums, streaming residuals, pension and health cap increases, pay increases for extras, required intimacy coordinators, which I can't believe hasn't been a rule before, and also provisions protecting diverse communities like requiring on-set makeup and hair services for all hair and skin types, which is another rule that seems like common sense but apparently needs to be written down so that it actually happens. The main issue with the SAG proposal is the AI stuff. Companies will be allowed to create digital replicas of deceased individuals with consent and compensation for the estate. They can also do this with living actors, background or otherwise, as long as they get paid the equivalent of what it would take to do the work themselves. This makes sure that the actors are actually hired and that AI can't be used to avoid paying these actors. On the surface, it sounds great, but let's think about this for a sec. I know the union's job is to protect its members specifically, but these provisions don't exactly solve the problem of AI invading creative spaces. I'm sure the studios wouldn't have budged further, and again, it's not the union's job to deal with that. But just like with the writer's provision, you can still use AI. Even with consent, it's kind of a complicated issue. I'm sure that most actors would actually want to do the work themselves, but still, there's going to be some that won't. And I feel like the studios would prefer to hire those people over the ones who actually would want to work in person. Because even though they still have to get paid the same way, the studios could then save money on production crews since they wouldn't need as many shoot days, so there's less work available for production crews. It would still cost less and take less time to have the AI do it. Also, who's going to decide what that appropriate pay looks like? It just feels like there's so much room to exploit loopholes. I guess we'll see how things work out in the next 3 years, which is when the proposed contract would expire. Right now, the SAG members are voting to ratify this deal, and we'll know the results of that by early December. I feel like it'll get ratified just because people want the strike to end. The problem with SAG is it literally has a monopoly on the acting workforce, so even if its leadership isn't popular with the members or they come up with less than perfect deals, there's no other way. The Guild has also voted to authorize a strike for voice actors and physical motion and stunt performers against some major video game companies such as Activision and Epic Games like they did back in 2016 through 17. That strike had been the first in the video game industry and the longest ever in SAG history, lasting almost a year, but the resulting contract didn't do much. SAG doesn't represent nearly as many voice actors, much less video game voice actors, and since video game companies mostly hire non-union actors and don't rely on big-name actors to sell their games, strikes don't really move the industry that much. This time around, AI is a big consideration, and at last call, SAG was in negotiations with these companies, so I'm hoping that goes well and doesn't mandate a strike. Entering negotiations next year will be the Animation Guild TAG and its parent union IATSE, the Guild for Skilled Workers in Theater and Motion Pictures. Both their contracts expire in 2024. IATSE have also now started repping VFX workers at Disney and Marvel after they voted unanimously to unionize. A VFX artist and IATSE rep said the goal is to get VFX workers from other studios to unionize so the union can try to set an industry standard contract. As I talked about before, these artists can be mistreated quite badly with no regulations, so this is really a great step forward. Production workers at Walt Disney Animation have also voted to unionize, and they would also be under IATSE, so next year's negotiations will definitely be something to look out for. No one loves a strike, but workers in this industry and others have long been exploited so that companies can maximize their revenue and stuff their executives' pockets. And though the resolutions of this year's strikes may not have been perfect, they did still achieve a lot of protections, and hopefully this won't be the last time that happens. Thanks for listening, and once again, this was Trash Talk Reverse.